Hello and welcome to The Thing About Golf, the Golf Australia magazine podcast series attempting to answer that intriguing question. Just what is it about this silly game? My name's Rod Morri and I'm your tour guide of sorts for these explorations into the minds of those for whom golf is more, so much more, than just a game. On episode 18, we're going to meet one of the European Tour's most popular players of the 80s and 90s when Zimbabwe's Tony Johnstone joins us to talk golf, multiple sclerosis, birdwatching, television, and plenty more as well. Tony's known as one of the game's great storytellers, and whilst today's interview hopes to bring out much more than just that side of him, it is irrepressible, and I can tease you by letting on that during our chat, Tony refers to Greg Norman as both a pussy and a sclaffer. And I'm not sure there are many who could get away with that. Tony Johnstone in just a moment. But first, some admin. As always, a special welcome if you're a first-time listener. Great to have you aboard. And assuming you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe in whatever podcast app you prefer. Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts are the big three. And once you've pressed that button, you never have to worry about it again. Each episode automatically delivered to your preferred listening device, and you'll never miss one of our shows. As regular listeners will know, we've been at this for just over a year now. And in fact, this past week was the anniversary of our very first episode with the remarkable amateur Sue Worcester. That's an interview I still recommend, but there's plenty of others in the archive that'll capture the imagination, including a terrific chat with Meg McLaren and a really fun discussion with Christina Kim and her boyfriend and LPGA caddy, Duncan French. Now, we always enjoy getting feedback about the show, so feel free to get in touch. You'll find me on Twitter at @Rod_Morri. That's M for Mary O-R-R-I. My DMs are open, so anyone can send a message. I can tell you that is a somewhat dangerous practice if you're considering going down that path. The show has its own Twitter handle at @ThingGolf, capital T-H-I-N-G, capital G-O-L-F. Or you can seek out the magazine on Facebook, or if you're really old school, send us an email, golf@golfaustralia.com.au. Well, time now to turn our attention to today's guest, and Tony Johnstone's voice will be instantly recognisable to anybody who has watched the European Tour in the last 2 decades. He's a terrific analyst of the game who also brings a magical sense of humour and a swag of great stories from his days on the tour in the 80s and 90s. But there's much more to the Tony Johnstone story than just his gregarious personality. He describes himself as making Jekyll and Hyde look like amateurs and readily admits that his antics and temper tantrums on the golf course in his playing days were a constant source of embarrassment. In this interview, Tony also talks about the incredible story of how he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2003 and was the last man chosen for a drug trial which has seen him symptom-free for the best part of 2 decades. We touch on his birdwatching, his second career in television, and yes, even find out in what context he referred to the shark as a sclaffer. I hope you enjoy as much as I did this chat with one of the genuine good guys of golf, Tony Johnstone. Well, I suppose the first thing we've got to say, Tony Johnstone, is thanks for taking some time in what is normally a very busy schedule, but in this new surreal world we live in, I don't think you've got much on in the diary thanks to coronavirus.
No, it's my pleasure. No, and I mean, it's a strange mix. It's the choice of doing nothing or absolutely nothing. So boredom is starting to kick in after a week of lockdown. Oh my God! Yeah,
did I see you saying on Twitter that you were involved in a race to the couch with your wife and that you'd won, which may not have been the best idea you've had this week, I can assure you.
No, it wasn't the best idea because she's now become velcroed to the couch so that she doesn't have to try and race me to get there.
Indeed. On a serious note, what are you doing? I know you've been very busy on Twitter, obviously. In all honesty, and I didn't think I'd ever say this, thank God for social media.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And, the only problem with social media and Twitter, you get the keyboard warriors who sit there. They've got nothing better to do than just, get online and start having a go at people for no reason. But for some reason, there's been absolutely none of that this week. I think people are just sort of sitting at home and getting in a chilled state, as they should. But it remains to see how long we can all stay chilled, because I think we're all going to go stir crazy eventually.
Yeah, indeed. It's my rule is this, Tony. If someone doesn't have their name on their Twitter account, I just don't pay any attention to them. If they're trolling, just if you're not going to put your name to it, you're not worth listening to. So. Indeed.
That's exactly right. I agree 100%.
Not what we came together to talk about. The podcast is not called The Thing About Social Media. The podcast is called The Thing About Golf, Tony. What's the thing about golf? For Tony Johnstone, it's been a huge part of your life.
Yeah, it really has. Everything I have is through golf. I met Karen, my wife, through golf. My career was obviously golf. My kids came because of Karen through golf. So, yeah, I mean, golf has been, it's been the cornerstone of my whole life, really. And I'm very grateful for it, and I wouldn't do anything differently. I mean, maybe I would have a better temperament on the golf course, but if I was the same person, I probably wouldn't. So there you go.
We might talk about that a bit later, because there's probably something in that, and there's some interesting things about players matching their personalities to their games. Where did it start for you, Tony? Who passed on the infection that is golf to Tony Johnstone?
It was quite strange. When I was 11, we went for a holiday up in the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe. At a little hotel called Leopard Rock, which was a tiny little, it was almost like a little castle out in the wilderness. And they had a 9-hole course, and the manager insisted that everybody in the hotel come and play in this golf competition. And my dad and I had never played golf. We'd never had a golf club, nothing. So he signed us up, off we went. And I had the love of golf drummed into me, because towards the end of the 9-hole competition, we were just chopping and hacking around. And the shot my dad hit the best, there was a huge boulder about 15 feet high by 30 feet off in front of us. And he took a wild swing at this thing and flushed it, hit the rock, came straight back towards my head, put my arm in front of my face, and it nailed me right on the corner of the elbow. And I mean, yeesh, did I cry or what? It was the most painful experience. And you think right then I might have said, listen, this is not for me. No, we just fell in love with it. We went home. My dad went to an auction, bought a set of clubs for himself and a couple of sticks for me just to knock around the garden with. And that was it. Fell in love with it. Cut a few holes with tins, and I made my own golf course around the garden over my mom's dahlias. And, if I went in the dahlias, I took a swing and destroyed her garden. She was a mad keen gardener. And then it went on like that for a while. And then my dad joined us up to a little golf course in Bulawayo, the hometown. And utterly fell in love with it. Within a year of playing golf, I had really decided that was pretty much what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a golf professional, and that was my goal thereafter.
Yeah, fantastic. And, of course, you went on to achieve that. Two things stand out to me about that story. One, where's Tiger Woods in the crowd when you need them to move the boulder? You don't get that in the backwaters of Zimbabwe, yes. Do you? You only get that on the PGA Tour. And the second thing is, do kids still do that, Tony? Bury jam tins in the back lawn and stick sticks in them and chip to them and pitch to them. A lot of things have changed about golf. That might be one of them, mightn't it?
A lot of things, a lot of things have changed. I mean, in our current house, we've been here for 30-odd years now in Sunningdale. When we first moved in, I've always been a lawnaholic. And I gave my son a choice. I said, listen, you can either have a football field or you can have a golf green. What do you want? And thankfully, he said a golf green. So, I kept it for years and years. I had help from the local greenkeeper, Lawson Bigham, good friend of mine. And I had all the greens equipment, a proper greens mower, Ransom's cylinder mower. And I used to have it running at about 7 or 8 on the stump. And my son Dale, that was his putting green. So I cut holes and I had flags in there. And, once he got his driver's license and he's a member at Sunningdale, I decided to put the blades up a bit because it was too much like hard work. But, it's a good question. Do people still do that? The other thing I wonder if people still do it a lot. When we were kids growing up in my hometown in Bulawayo, I mean, we had, there was no golf on TV. It was still black and white TV actually. Access, because of international sanctions, access to magazines and things was very limited. So we used to just go out with our buddies, with really chopped up golf balls, which you couldn't get either. And we would just go and we'd get dropped off on the school holidays at 7:30 in the morning, get picked up at 5:30 in the evening, and we would just go round and round and round the golf course and practice all day long. But we practiced as a group. We would go around greens and we'd find impossible shots and we'd have competitions, get behind a bunker. You got to cut it up over the bunker to the flag just the other side with a 6-iron and, all that sort of thing. And it definitely taught us a heck of a lot about the game and the short game and shaping shots. It was a wonderful learning ground. And also because we had no access to, to international media, I don't think we really realized how tough the game is supposed to be and how sort of impossible our dreams were, because we all dreamed about being excellent golf pros. You wanted to be one of the best in the world, and nobody was saying, look, this is a dream, you can't. You know, you're a 4'2" hacker from Bulawayo. How can you be dreaming about being a tour pro and, you know, competing with the best in the world? But there was nobody to tell us that it wasn't possible. Our folks used to push us. No, not push us is the wrong word. They used to encourage us. Pushing is the worst thing you can do with a young kid in any form of sport. But they gave us maximum encouragement. We had great junior programs. We had competitions in the school holidays, great junior foundations. You know, we would just play competitive golf the whole school holidays. And it turned out that we produced quite a few good golfers, the likes of Nick Price, Mark McNulty, Dennis Watson, Simon Hobday. It was phenomenal, really.
We often think in Australia that in terms of professional golf, we punch above our weight. Zimbabwe might be punching 3 divisions above their weight with the names you've just reeled off there, in all fairness.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. And at the maximum, there were probably only 10,000 golfers in the whole of Zimbabwe. Oh. I mean, it just wasn't a leading sport. Rugby and cricket, obviously, being a colony, were. And for such a small community, it was amazing. We used to have an interprovincial golf tournament, an inter-club competition from all the clubs around the country in Harare, or Salisbury as it was then. And we were in the secondary club in Bulawayo, and our highest handicapper was scratch out of a team of 8 juniors. I mean, it was just unheard of. You know, we just took it for granted. We thought, well, this is the norm, but it absolutely wasn't. And we used to compete. I mean, the competition was fierce amongst us.
Mm. I wonder whether we talked about how sort of golf has changed, and it's changed in line with society. Golf just hasn't changed outside of it. It's all a part of the same thing. I wonder how you would compare that as a learning experience in terms of learning the game, and I think in particularly of golf here, which is such a complex game with such a myriad of problems to solve, with what we see these days, which is, well, in America, I know that there's a fairly significant junior tour. It's almost a mini professional tour. There's golf academies where kids eat, sleep, breathe golf. That's all they do all day, every day, and they're on TrackMans early on, and they've got specific exercises. Do we produce better golfers, Tony, or just different golfers in the modern era?
Different. I think there's less. How can I put this? I don't want to offend the current golfers, because the current mob of golfers are absolutely as talented as we ever were. But we were asked different questions with our upbringing in the game, with the equipment, etc. And we didn't have coaches. We went out and we were self-taught, and we just ground it out on the practice ground and learned a way to play. And by that token, we definitely learned to have different skills around the greens. You know, we were talking last week with Mike Clayton and Billy Foster that said he never, ever used more than a 56-degree wedge. And, you know, these days all the kids have got 60-degree wedges, big-headed drivers, modern golf balls. And I don't think it produces as much feel in the game. When my son Dale, when he wanted his first set of clubs, proper clubs, I said, that's no problem, I can organise that. And I went up to the loft and got out a set of old Blade Mizuno. I gave him half a set. Oh, no. And he was mortified. You know, his kids all had these new Callaways and all, you know, tailor-mades. He said, so what are these, Dad? I said, those are your new clubs. He said, but they're not new. And all my friends have got, 14 clubs. I said, well, good luck to your friends. I said, you're going to learn with Blade clubs and a half a set. And you're going to learn to hit all the shots and all the shapes. And I think he appreciates that now, because he plays off too. He loves the game. But he's always keen to shape the ball and hit shots. He loves it. And I think that's been taken out of the game, the joy of shaping the golf ball, which was a skill. And there was nothing more satisfying than seeing, I'm going to hit a nice little low fade, rising here, started 10 yards left of the flag, faded into the right pin, and you pulled it off. And you felt like a king. You know, the modern ball is so hard to move now that, it is just a completely different game.
It feels like the game's become more mathematical, and it's probably a result in part of the amount of money that's available in professional golf these days, certainly for the men. On the LPGA, you can do quite well too, and the Ladies European Tour is starting to sort of get there, but there's a lot of money in professional golf, isn't there? And when that happens, the incentive becomes less about the satisfaction of the game and more about the most efficient way to play it. I remember this plays into stereotypes, but I think it makes the point nicely. Somebody once said, if golf had been invented by a German, it'd be a very simple game. You pick up the ball on the first tee, you run to the ground and throw it in the hole, and whoever does that the quickest wins. Whereas the Scots gave you this array of ridiculous equipment that was completely ill-suited to the purpose. They put a bunch of stuff in the way and said, there you go, have at it. It's
well,
two different games.
In a way, I would agree with you. But, saying that there's so much money now that guys can afford to, never win a golf tournament and they can make $1 million or $2 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
There was so little money in our day that, if you wanted to feed your family and buy a house and pay your mortgage, you had to be competitive. If you were finishing 30th every week, you couldn't make a living. I mean, you just could not survive. So your prime goal was to go out there and win, and finish in the top 2 or 3 at worst, because that's when you made a decent check. And I mean, I can genuinely say that even when I was absolutely skint and came out on tour with nothing, it never entered my mind when I got on the first tee of a golf tournament thinking, how much money can I make this week? It never entered my mind. You knew that if you played well, the money would follow. But the prime concern on the first tee every week was, I want to win this bloody tournament. I just want to beat everybody. And I think we see quite a lot of it these days on Sundays on all the tours. Guys go into protective mode. They almost look like they're a lot of the guys, not all of them, but it looks like they're trying to protect the score and earn a nice check, which to me is absolute rubbish. The whole idea of being a golf pro is to get out there and to win tournaments, surely.
What do you remember about those early days on tour? I spoke to Peter Senior on this show a few months back, and he recalled sort of his first win, and it was all very emotional because they were literally out of money, he and his wife. It was his last tournament. He made triple up the very first hole. in his last possible, it was like,
nice.
Once we finish this week, we're going home to Australia because we've got nothing left. And then he went on to win the tournament. What's your recollection of how that worked? I don't think many pros find themselves in that situation. No, that's actually not fair. There's an awful lot of pros struggle to make a living, and it's a very difficult game still. But if you make it to the big show, you're not struggling for a quid, are you?
Yeah. No. I mean, these days, there's 150 guys making a good living every year, pretty much. But I mean, my first recollection was being pretty poor, really. Yeah, I went to university down in Durban in South Africa, played for Rhodesia, my home country, and played for Natal, the province down there. And they had a strange rule in those days. For some unknown reason on the Sunshine Tour, you had to give back half of your prize money for your first 6 months as a professional. God knows why. I think maybe it was to try and sort of eliminate the dross. They didn't want every man and his dog coming out on tour. And I had to forego my finals at uni because I turned pro in the May. And in those days, if you finished in the top 30 in South Africa, you got a card to play in Europe because there was Monday qualifying in Europe. It wasn't an all-exempt tour. So, I had to go and play the Sunshine Tour in November, December when my exams were going to be held, much to my folks' chagrin because, I'd done my full uni course out there in Bachelor of Arts. And don't laugh at this, Rod, but one of my majors was psychology. If you tell that to Clayton, they'll fall off the bench laughing.
You were your own PhD.
So yes, I didn't. Absolutely. But yeah, I went and played on the tour, got a card for Europe, always with the intention of going back and finishing my degree, but it would have had to have been another full year. But I turned pro, and off I came over to Europe with nothing really. I had one sponsorship from a company called Hang 10 that made trousers and headgear and stuff. And a wonderful old guy, Jim Allerton, for some reason saw something in me and decided to give me a couple of bob to go and play in Europe. And my folks gave me a bit of money, and off I came over here with my good friend Dave Stratton. And off you went. It was you, your buddies, your caddies, and you went and played the tour. And when you look back at it now, you think, my God, what were we thinking? It was a recipe for disaster, really.
But it's an adventure, isn't it, Tony?
And I remember...
That's an adventure.
A huge adventure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can remember clearly, distinctly, I was a member at Royal Durban Golf Club, and one of the old members, he was an old attorney, came over to me. It was announced in the paper that day that, provincial golfer Tony Johnstone was turning pro. And he came over and he said, listen, I don't want you to take this personally, but I think you're going to starve. I won't take that personally. Thanks very much for your deep concern. And I came over to Europe and I played nicely. And the second year I lost in a playoff at Cran with Antonio Garrido and Manuel Pinera. And when I went back home, this guy said to me, well, what's it like on the bread and butter line? And I mean, I wasn't in that league, but I couldn't resist it. I said, I wouldn't know. I'm on Xavier and Campe now, you'll get. And he sort of stumbled off, and it felt so rewarding.
More so than the good guy. No sentence that starts with "don't take this the wrong way" ever ends well, does it? It's just not an opening that leads to a fruitful conversation.
It's like somebody that starts a sentence with "trust me."
Yeah,
the warning lights go on. Whatever you do not trust this bastard. Whatever you do, don't trust him.
That's exactly
if he's
right.
going to tell you to trust him, you can't.
What did you know about tour golf by the time you'd made that decision, Tony? Because you said as you were growing up, no golf on television. Clay tells similar stories. And what age were you when you turned professional? It was tradition for people to turn much later. I think 30 or 40 years ago. We see kids turning pro now at 16, 17, 18, 19, not uncommon. They're winning majors at 20 and 21 sometimes. And what did you know of the tour?
Well, I only turned pro at 22, actually, because I'd been to uni for a couple of years. But I'd played in a couple of tournaments down there. I played in the South African Open in 79, finished 10th there as an amateur, leading amateur. I played in a couple of tournaments in Rhodesia, as it was then, the Dunlop Masters. Now, I had a fair idea, and I sort of, I knew I had to get better, but I did believe in myself, and I thought, if I can work really, really hard at this and improve, I can make a living doing this. And whether you believed in it or not, thankfully it did work. It took me 5 years to my first win. You were talking about Peter Fowler. My first win was the South African Open in 1984, and as you said, I mean, it's so emotional. If you're from that part of the world, that's the tournament to win, and that's when I really started believing or knowing. There's a difference between believing you can win and knowing you can win. Once you've got one under the belt, it's just, the monkey's off the back, and let's just go and play golf.
But believing you can win is a little bit cocky. Having won, you now have confidence. They're two slightly different things, aren't they? Both important, but they're slightly different, aren't they? You notice players sometimes will change from cocky to a much more appealing confidence once they've had a victory. I'm thinking of Lucas Herbert in particular. You would probably know Lucas, commentating on the European Tour.
Yes.
And certainly he's one who's been very brash in his younger years and not afraid of controversy and headlines and all those sorts of things. And after he won in Dubai, he came back to Australia and he was in the press conference at the Vic Open. There was a definite change in him, much less cocky and a much more comfortable confidence. They're different things, aren't they?
They are different. I think the cockiness, you've got a point to prove. You might be the only one out there that believes that you can win. So, you can't get pushed around. You've got to believe in yourself. And, when you get that win under your belt, you can believe. Look, there are some guys that when they get the first win, they become intolerable. They become absolute dicks, to be honest. Yeah. But thankfully, those are the minority. And I think once you won one, you realize, hang on, I'm there. I have arrived, and now I've got to reset the goals and get on and go and play some good golf again.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. What do you remember about that first win? Something must stand out about that tournament, I assume. Actually, let's go back a bit. What do you remember about your first event as a professional, the first time you teed it up? Can you remember the first tee shot you hit when you were no longer an amateur, or is there anything that stands out about that event? And then that first win and everything that comes along with that.
I can't really remember my first shot as a pro, to be honest. Yes, I can. It wasn't actually in tournaments. They used to have a series of pro-am tournaments around South Africa, and we went to a course called Witbank. And the pro there was a wonderful guy called Yanni Ackerman. And you went and played in this thing. The prize money was tiny, but the whole Sunshine Tour was there as a warm-up for the Sunshine Tour proper. And I went out, and I think I finished second and made a check, which actually enabled me really to get, to live a proper life on the early part of the Sunshine Tour. And then I went on from there. And the South African Open, it sounds ridiculous. I mean, it was in 1984, but I can remember most of the shots that I hit there, to be honest. A couple that really stood out in particular, but it just meant so much. It just meant so much. It was beat Fulton Allen down the home stretch. Fantastic goal for 40 was. And all the guys were there. All the top South Africans. Gary Player was there. John Bland, Hugh Hockey, Nick Price. All the guys were there. And if you can beat those guys, you think, hang on, I definitely can do this. I'm in the right line of work, maybe.
Yeah, indeed. Well, of course, and you think of Nick Price, especially went on to win 3 majors. So yes, if you can beat him, you can you can mix it anywhere in the world. What was life like on the European tour, Tony? We hear these stories about it being fantastic and gregarious and wonderful, and everything was. I'm sure it can't be all true, can it? There must have been parts about it that weren't fantastic, but in a funny way, that less money equals more fun, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, we used to have an unbelievable amount of fun on the tour. And, as I alluded to earlier, you went out on tour, particularly once you'd had kids. It was you, your caddy, and your buddies on tour. And that was it. That was your support structure. You didn't have managers and sports psychologists and, all these guys hanging on and sucking the blood out of you. And you just had fun. We would go down to reception in the evening. The first 6 or 7 guys that were down would all come together. You'd have an Aussie, a Brit, a Southern African, an American, and you'd all wander off and just go and find a restaurant. And the camaraderie was fantastic. And, if somebody missed a cut, it wasn't, you weren't totally self-centered. Look, I've made a cut, I must make a nice check now. You genuinely felt for the guys. And if they were struggling with their game, the guys would be around him on the tee trying to help him and give him advice and get him back on the rails again. But the laughs we had then, if we had to tell them all, we would go on for 2 weeks. We had a lot of laughs, and there was a warmth in the tour. Nowadays, a lot of the guys go out with their little clique of manager, coach, sports psychologist, physio. And, I think there's a little less mixing, perhaps.
It's more business, isn't it? Although it was business back then too, I guess. Did any of that impact the way you play, do you think, Tony? The way the game was played by professionals?
Yeah, I think probably the same thing that the guys think today. Just practice as hard as you can. But it made life easier. I think it made longevity easier because you were out there with friends on tour. All the guys have their friends on tour, but we used to go out and you could pick anybody on tour and go out for dinner with them and have a great time. And I'm not sure that applies now. You were trying to beat the guy the next day. You might have dinner with him one night on the Saturday night, both in contention, and the next day the gloves were off, and I want to cut your throat. I just want to kill you. I don't want you to get that first place check. I want it. And that was the understanding. And then, 24 hours later, you're best buddies again. So it was an interesting experience. I remember guys telling me a couple of years before I came on tour, guys like Simon Hobday, Jack Newton, Ian Stanley, there was a bunch of them. They used to pool their money. Can you believe this? They used to get paid in cash. They used to pool their money, stick it in a big jar, and they paid all their expenses out the jar, all of them. There were about 5 or 6 of them. Wow. Can you imagine that happening today? And, it was more of a vocation, I think. Guys just wanted to play golf. They wanted to travel the world. They wanted to compete, and they just wanted to play golf. And they used to go out to dinner with their jar under their arm. And go and pay for dinner with the jar. If a guy missed a cut, well, he got a share of the money next week, and off they went. And an amazing time out on tour.
Yeah. With that crew that you've just outlaid in particular, that's just an extended version of the Shout, isn't it? Because all of them.
I tell you what, it's an extended version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Actually, can you imagine the chaos they caused? Vin Baker was another one, the late Vin Baker. I mean, they were the wild bunch personified, but the fun they used to have, the fun we used to have. We just loved it. We loved being out there.
I've never obviously met him. I never got the chance to see him play, but people talk about Hobday with great reverence as perhaps one of the great comedians, if not great golfers of his time.
Yeah, we should probably have a podcast just on Hobday. I mean, the Hobday stories. I played with Lee Trevino, who was considered the funny man of golf. But to be honest, after 5 or 6 holes, the repertoire started repeating. And after 18 holes, you were a little bit bored with it.
It's an act, isn't
Hobday
it?
was
it's a rehearsed.
Yeah, it was.
It's been successful, and you can
it
always.
It was a rehearsed thing.
Yeah, but not.
Yeah, no, Hobday was as mad as a hatter, but a lovable mad hatter. And he had these one-liners that just came into his head, and they were absolute originals, and they came throughout his life. And he was the sort of leader of the cohort, Hobday. But as a striker, he would have been in the same league as Tom Watson and Ben Hogan. No question. He was, unfortunately, a horrendous putter. When he won the US Seniors Open, they asked him afterwards how he felt. He had about a 3-footer on the last. And he said he was way too nervous to choke. Because he was a pretty nervous man with a putt. I remember in the Rhodesian Open one year, he was leading and I was second. I was still an amateur in those days and I finished second to him. But on the putting green, before we teed off, I said, play well today, Hobbs. And he literally couldn't get a word out. And he just walked off. I mean, he was a gibbering idiot. And but what a wonderful man. And the stories, the Hobday stories. Dale Hayes did a book called Hole in One. He and Dennis Hutchinson and Hobday before he passed away. But the stories were a little bit sanitized because a lot of the people that appear in those stories are still alive. But Hobday's life, just to sum up what Hobday was like, I was told on a Thursday that Hobbs was really close to passing away. So I phoned him and I said, listen, Hobbs, geez, I'm sorry to hear, that you're not feeling well. He says, not feeling well? He says, I'm absolutely buggered. He says, I'm done. I'm out of here. And we kept on chatting. And eventually I said to him, well, Hobbs, you know how much we all loved you. He says, well, of course. Why wouldn't you? And a week later, he passed away. And his good friend, Peter Makovich, was at his bedside. And Hobbs was renowned for not being able to say a speech. And Makovich said to him, listen, Hobbs said to him, he said, Macca, what will happen if I miraculously go to heaven? What will I say when I walk in the pearly gates? Macca said, listen, Hobbs, I can't give you the advice, but for God's sakes, don't prepare it because you will cock it up. and Hobbs just smiled and passed away. And he was that sort of man till the very, very end. He was an absolute legend.
We should all be so lucky to go in such a way, Tony. There's something quite beautiful about that, isn't there? That to die the way that you've lived. Is golf unique in the way it attracts this broad array of personality types? Some of them quite defective, frankly, it has to be said. I mean that in a nice way.
Look, I would agree. I'd say almost every single pro after a year on tour is slightly defective mentally. I think you've got to be defective mentally to volunteer for it in the first place. But after a year on tour, the brain cells are already starting to die. And, I think the one thing about pro golfers, there's not a single pro golfer out there that's not OCD. Every single one of us is OCD, without question. And, you can't stand on a practice tee and hit millions of balls for 30 years expecting the most incremental change if you're not OCD. It's just as simple as that. And you're living under, look, people will say, if they're running businesses, yes, they have a lot of pressure. It's just a different type of pressure. You're all on your own. There's no backup. If you don't perform, you don't eat. And neither do your family, as simple as that. And you can relate that to any business, I suppose. But, you're away from home in the height of your career. You're away from home for 25 or 30 weeks a year. And, I'm not crying for sympathy. That's what we chose. Yeah. There are a lot of guys that go, oh, I had to give up so much. No, we chose to give it up. When we're at home, we had terrific times. When you have a week off, we had the advantage on the average working man because we were there, all day, every day for a week or 2 weeks. So we had great times with our families, but we wanted to be out there. We wanted to be out there competing, and you can't do that on your back door. We had to travel. And that's where the importance of, the support structure of your friends came in. But, yeah, we wanted to do it. We wanted to play. We wanted to travel. And, that was our life. We loved it.
Indeed. It strikes me, Tony, that the way you've grown up in golf terms is very different to a lot of people. Did you have heroes? You mentioned that when you were young, you'd just go around the course with your mates and practice, hitting this shot and that shot, and this is impossible. Were you copying somebody? For most of us, we're copying, depending on your generation, Nicholas or Woods or Norman, or were you copying people, and what effect do you think that might have had?
Coming from Southern Africa, all of us, our hero was Gary Player. Mm-hmm. And, when I said earlier we didn't have much access to magazines and things, Gary used to do a cartoon strip every week in the papers that got put into book form of him giving tips. I mean, that was my Bible. I read that every single night, and basically developed my game, particularly in my short game, on what I'd read from Gary. And, with him being renowned as the best bunker player in the world, people say, well, why are so many Southern Africans great bunker players? And it's because of Gary. When we were young, we wanted to be able to do what Gary did. And, we spent hours and hours and, entire school holidays practicing in bunkers. And Gary's determination, his desire to win, that definitely rubbed off on us. Some of that is inherent. It comes from your upbringing and your family and what they instill in you. But there's no question that Gary was the hero of every Southern African golfer from our era.
Once you got to the tour, who were the stars of the time, and what are your recollections of sort of who you played with? What was the best golf you saw? We spoke, as you said, we did that long podcast about Seve with Billy Foster and Mike, and I'm sure that he'll appear somewhere in there, Seve. But who were the best players you played with, and what separated them? What made them better and the best? And what were the strengths of your game? I think you won 6 times in Europe, 17 times in South Africa. A couple of those maybe co-sanctioned. So pretty impressive career in terms of victories. What were the bits of your game? But who were the best, and then what were your strengths?
The best, Norman, Seve, and Nick Price. Probably. I played later on when I started sort of producing the goods with the likes of Tom Watson, etc. But early on, Norman, Seve, Nick Price. And I was very lucky to have John Bland. He was my best buddy out on tour. Short hitter, but the straightest hitter maybe that ever lived. And he was a great mentor, showed me the ropes on tour. But entire game-wise, Norman and Seve. Norman, I've told you the story before, Rod, on a different podcast, but I'll repeat it. The Italian Open in 1980 at Acquasanta. I've just come out on tour. First year on tour, and I've made the cut, and I'm so excited. And John Bland and I are going out for dinner, and we look at the draw sheet in the hotel. And I said to him, who's this G. Norman from Australia? And he looked at me like an alien. He said, sorry? I said, who's G. Norman? He says, you are a bigger dick than I actually imagined. You don't know who Greg Norman is. He's been out here you don't? I said, Blandy, I'm sorry, I just don't know who he is. He said, you'll find out tomorrow, my friend. I thought, well, we'll see what happens, So I go up to the course, get on the first tee, and the first tee at Acquasanta was about 270 yards to the front edge of the green, with a ditch right up against the front edge of the green, a little canal. And the green was only about 15 or 18 yards deep, and every single player just nudged it down there with a 2 or a 3 iron, and then wedged it onto the green. So I get up first, wedge it onto 2 iron down the fairway, wedge it on the green. That's my plan. Norman tees it up next, and out comes the 3-wood. And I thought, geez, what a pussy this guy is. And he's going to hit a wood. Can't even get a wood up to my 2 iron. And he had these beautiful purple-headed Tommy Armour woods, the old persimmons. And he gets up, and I thought, oh, God, we'll know who this guy is by the time I'm finished. What a sclaffer. And he gets up, Rod, he hits this thing, and it comes out like a gunshot. I've never heard the like of it. It just took off, pooh, and I thought, oh, my God, what's this guy doing? And he flushed this thing, carried the ditch, landed on the green, stopped it on the green. I thought, well, that's quite impressive. He then followed it up, rolled it in for an eagle 2. We get on the next tier, par 3. He's on it. Hits the shot, beautiful, high in the sky, bounce, 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 straight in the bottom of the hole. Hole in one. And I mean, I am jumping around the tee like a raving lunatic. I've never seen anything like this. And I've gone up and stuck my hand up to shake his, and he actually looks at my hand as though it's covered in the COVID-19 virus. It's like, is there something wrong with you? I said, no, well done. He said, yeah, no, thanks. And, we were off right at the beginning of the day's play because he'd had an indifferent first 2 days. And he'd cruised around there. He didn't look particularly interested and just whipped it around there in something like 67 or 66. And I sort of ground my heart out for a 71 or 72. And I came in, went into the players' lounge, and John Bland standing with ear-to-ear smile. He says, so do you know who Greg Norman is? Cheeky bugger. And that was that was my introduction to Greg Norman. Man, the guy led the world rankings for 5 years. The fact that he only won, really, you'd have to say, was a major disappointment.
Oh, travesty. An absolute travesty. All his own making, of course. He had a couple of major stolen from him, but he did cock a few up as well along the way. But, and he did everything fabulously. He looked like a clothes horse. He was statuesque, unbelievable, maybe the best driver that ever lived, a wonderful iron player, chipper, putter. Everything he did was just brilliant. And I came off the course a bit like when I went out to watch Seve my first year on tour. And I just thought, how am I going to compete with this guy? If I'm ever going to compete with these clowns, I need to be an awful lot better. And it was a great thing, a great learning experience, because you just better get better if you want to make a living doing this, because there are some guys out there that are freaks. And it was a good thing that I played with him. Yeah, indeed. Sclaffer. I wonder if he's ever been called a sclaffer before or since. He still hits it amazing these days. You occasionally see, occasionally, if you follow him on Instagram, you see plenty of him, but he still hits it like a dart in this day and age. What was the media and the hype surrounding golf at the time? What's your memory of that, Tony? Because, of course, in this day and age, everything's changed. The media might have changed more than golf through social media, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those things. There's much less focus on newspapers. Television's role has changed. They've gone much more from covering the game to being a partner in the game as a part of the business. So there's a lot of things have changed. What was your recollection of the 80s and the 90s, I suppose? Down here in Australia, there was one player and one player only. Norman was our Gary Player. In your sort of scenario, and people would turn up 6 deep. They'd line the fairways from the tee to the green for all 18 holes to watch him play at Huntingdale or the Australian Open. What was it like internationally then in Europe? You used to play a lot more golf in Europe itself as well at that time.
Yes. Everything was smaller. There wasn't really a dedicated media centre. If there was, it was a tiny little room. You'd have 2 or 3 reporters from maybe from England, 1 or 2 local guys, somebody from the local TV station who knew nothing about golf. And as you alluded to, there was more coverage in the paper, which was a great thing, because we had wonderful writers like John Huggan et al. Who wrote about the game. And I one of my majors at uni was English, and I've always rejoiced in the written word when it's written properly. Sadly, we don't get that much anymore. But TV is a big thing. I do sometimes wonder if, there's too much golf. It's the market's flooded, really. And I think people can turn on any time they like and watch. Whereas in those days, you had to turn it on to watch a specific event. And it was great. You didn't have 40 photographers out there. You had 1 or 2 dedicated photographers. They all became friends. The media guys became friends. And I think we understood the media better because they were there doing a job, getting underpaid, struggling along. If you were smart enough, you realized that these guys need to make a living and that what they say made your name for you, and promoted interest in sponsors for you. So, you treated them properly. You never went in there and bad-mouthed any reporters. They were doing their best. You were doing your best. And we were all one big happy family.
Well, now, of course, you have managers, so players very rarely speak directly to reporters, and if they do, it's all been organised in advance with time limits on it. And, in fact, sometimes people will even sit in on the interviews and start pointing to their wrists and telling you to wind it up after your allotted 8 minutes. That doesn't do much for the game, does it, Tony? The stories I grew up reading and the coverage I grew up reading was wonderful about the game. It made it this wonderful mystical thing. It's a very much more business-like relationship between the media and the players these days, it feels.
Well, it is. I mean, on the European tour, if media want to speak to a player, first they've got to go through the tour, through the player liaison officer, who then goes to speak to the manager, who then asks the player, and then it's got to come all the way back down the line, and it's absolute bollocks, if I can use that expression. You're earning your living because of the public. If there's no public interest in golf, we're all out of a job, every single one of us. And, if you have a good round where there's an incident of some kind and you're required in the media centre, the scorer should say, you are going to the media centre now, and the liaison officer should just take you over there. All this rubbish about having to, work your way through managers, etc., damn it, you've got all day. You can go to the media center for 10 minutes and give 10 minutes of your time. It's helping you. It's helping the tour. It's helping everybody. And I'm just not for it. I'm just not for this whole chain where you've got to get to a player to liaise with him, to get an interview. I just think it's absolute rubbish.
It sends a message to the players that they're more important than they are too, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and a lot of that is the fault of management companies. Let's be honest. They pamper these. They pamper these guys, and they instill in them this idea that they are the most important on God's planet. And the bottom line is we can hit a ball around a field into a hole in fewer strokes than anyone else. Get unbelievably paid for it, and I was in the same league. I had a good career. I made a good living out of it in the later years, but. That's what we do. We're not brain surgeons. We're entertainers. And, do the job, treat amateurs well in the Pro-Am. Everybody gets a little bit tired of the same questions in Pro-Ams. What's your real job? Oh, God. What's your handicap? Oh, God. And what do you do when you're not playing golf? Oh, God, I eat, I sleep, and I go to the toilet. Oh, please, God, take the pain away. But, that's unusual. Most people that play in Pro-Ams these days, they've got an idea, and you never know who you're playing with. It might be the head sponsor or his best buddy. And, you annoy enough people, we'd be out of sponsorships. So do the job, and the management companies need to see that. You can't put these guys up on a pedestal and everybody's got to dance around and pussyfoot around you. It's complete nonsense.
There might be one or two who are in that rarefied area. I think of Rory, I think of Tiger, who've kind of earned that, Tiger especially, the right to say no all the time. But for most of the rest, they really are kidding themselves, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's the truth. And they'll realise it all too late when people stop being interested, when people just stop bothering to ring.
No, you're absolutely right. 100% right. And, the top guys, you see the life they lead. Their life has to be a lot more structured, or they don't actually have a second to themselves, because they finish around, they've got to go and do TV interview, media interview, radio interview, blah, 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 and still find a life and time to practice. Yeah. Plus, they normally, they're there on an appearance fee, so they have a lot of stuff to do for sponsors, a lot of responsibilities, and if their life isn't structured, it just becomes a mess. But yeah, for the average really, good tour pro, it's not as bad as that. So just do the job.
You mentioned that, of course, maybe we've got too much golf. This is a theme that number of podcasts that I've been a part of, we keep coming back to. What do you think this coronavirus thing that we're, 3 weeks into at the moment? It already feels like golf happened for the last time eons ago, and there's nothing in the foreseeable future. I mean, the bleak outlook would say no more golf probably for the rest of 2020. I think at best you're looking at the back quarter of the year, September, maybe August, if things were really to go. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting time, isn't it, to reset for the sport?
God, it really is. I mean, I have a lot of fun on Twitter, and I love watching, people setting up practice nets and things in their backyards and things. It's hilarious. But, I mean, people are desperate to get out on a golf course again. And I think there'll be a surge in the game. We always talk about, reducing numbers in the game. Well, maybe that's because there is, we are inundated with maybe too much golf. You've got all the different tours around the world that are televised. But I think once it kicks off again, I think there'll be a mad rush for the game again, and a lot of popularity again.
Professional golf,
you would expect that.
Yeah,
I think.
Professional golf projects an image of the game that's not necessarily healthy, doesn't it? This is one of the problems or the conundrums for golf, is that people who've never played, if their only exposure is to have seen professional golf on television, it's not necessarily the sort of thing that would make you say, I'd like to go out and give that a go, is it?
No, maybe not. And I suppose until they give it a try, when you watch the top guys in any sport, it looks easy. So, here's a bunch of guys swatting a ball around a field into a hole, and then off they go and do it all again 18 times and then 72 times. But there's something about the challenge of the game, isn't there? Once you start trying the game, you get addicted. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the addiction is the fact that you can never beat the game. You can never achieve perfection. There's always a challenge there. And I think that's That's one of the glorious things about the game.
We all know somebody who's incredibly competent in their own field who tries golf for the first time and is just humiliated by it. I think we've all experienced that, haven't we? Cruelly, it's a joy to watch sometimes. Somebody brought down a peg or two by the game. But how do we get people to engage the game in that way, Tony? I agree with you. If you don't try golf, you can't possibly ever understand it. It doesn't matter how passionate an advocate you are for the game. You can never explain to somebody who doesn't play. And the truth is, not everybody will go on to fall in love with the game. Some people, it just does leave them cold, and that's fair enough. But how do we get more people to try it? It seems that's the missing link in the golf chain. Those who are in golf are fanatical about it, a lot of them, and they're very devoted to it. But those who are outside of golf, there's quite a bit of resistance among some, if not indifference, which might even be worse.
Yeah, I think we've got to go back to basically to the youth. We've got to go back to the kids and get them involved. The current generation, they're either playing golf or they're not. You can get some of them to restart, but we've got to encourage the youngsters to get out there. That's where the next generation comes from. And, I said to you earlier, we had great junior programs when we were in Rhodesia, which was a tiny golfing country, and in South Africa. We used to go down there for test matches. But you've got to get the kids interested. If you get it at grassroots level, if you can get the kids interested, there's our next generation, and we won't be worrying about numbers. But, the game's become so expensive. It's become so time-consuming. We've got to find ways around all of those problems. But those that get addicted, they're addicted for life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about that. Well, here's two of us sitting right here. Last one about this one. Do we focus sometimes too much, or is there too much focus on elite performance in the idea of trying to attract juniors? We don't ever seem to sell golf as this is the game you can have for life, and you can go away from it for periods, for families and business reasons, and try other sports. But golf will always be there right up until the time you fall off the perch. I wonder whether we sell that enough.
That's a good question. That's a really good question.
Some of us have no aptitude for the game,
I don't know how to answer that.
And even at a young age, I could have told you that I was never going to be any good at the game. And so there must be some other reason to play beyond just performance, I think. I wonder about that.
Well, yeah, I suppose exercise, you're outdoors. And, it always used to amaze me in pro-ams. You'd play with guys in the pro-ams that were absolutely atrocious. Their handicap officially was 24, but really they couldn't burst a grape. And the look on their faces, how much they were enjoying it. And I used to think, being a fairly competitive person, I used to think, why would you come out? How could you come out and enjoy this if you know you're always going to be utterly crap at it, Because anything that I ever did, I sort of wanted to be the best I could. But not everybody's built like that. And people go out there who are lousy, but man, they love the game. And that really, really does impress me. And those people are the ones, they're the majority of the game. They're the guys that keep golf afloat. Pro golf, we might be the elite, but basically we're the entertaining elite. And if every pro golfer in the world kicked the bucket tomorrow, it wouldn't make a difference to the game. The game would still continue. And that's what you got to stress. And those are the people we need to get more involved in the game. Speed the game up, make it a little bit, somehow make it more interesting, make it more, just make it more enjoyable somehow. I don't know.
We've got a little bit off the track. Two other things I want to talk to you about. Television. When did your television career start? Do you enjoy it? And what are the keys to it? I like your commentary. Guarantee there'll be people out there who don't. That's the nature of the world. If you've got any sort of a public job, you'll have fans and detractors.
Sure.
What's your take on television? You've been in it for a fair while now, I think.
I love doing it. I started off doing a sort of a Wednesday program for Sky, sort of a magazine program. And then they said, look, you're doing all right. We'd like to have you in the studio during the US golf. And then it progressed to commentary.
How long ago, Tony? What period was this? When are we talking?
And in fact, just before 2000, I was doing bits and pieces for Sky. And then, once I sort of the early 2000s, I was doing a fair bit. I was still trying to play a bit on the seniors tour. But then when I called it a day, and that was all the way up to 2014, I was doing I was playing and doing 13 weeks of Sky a year and just loved it. I love being out there. I love mixing with the youngsters. I love being involved in the game. I don't love playing the game because the game, to be brutally honest, drove me absolutely frigging nuts my whole life. I mean, I stopped playing because I'd said to my wife, Karen, 20 years prior, the day I feel I'm not competitive, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not George Foreman. I'm not going to have all these comebacks. I'm done. Because I always had, a slightly volatile temper, you have to say, on the golf course. I was renowned for being a bit of a volcano. And I would come off the golf course every single day of my life, exhausted from fighting my temper and embarrassed about my temperament. And the next day I'd get on the first tee and they'd write, today will be different. You'll be normal today. You'll be fine. And within 3 holes, the head was off. And, it just got to the point that the frustration outweighed the pleasure. I didn't feel I was competitive. And that's when I decided, look, I'm going to call this a day. I loved golf as a tool to compete. I loved it when I was young. But, after 35 years out on tour, and you get to a point where you can see the shots, but you don't hit them. I'm going to hit a nice, high, soft little fade to that back right flag, and you get up and you hit a pull hook. And the head comes off and there's clubs go, it was just horrendous. So I called it a day. We got into TV. And I've loved doing it ever since. We have a great 2 teams. I work for Sky and I work for the World Feed, as you know, the international feed. I'm lucky to work for both, and we've got 2 great commentary teams on both sides. They've now amalgamated the 2 commentary teams each week into one for the European tour. And, we always have a great time. It's all my buddies that I played with in the sort of 80s, 90s, Andrew Coltart, Mark James, Sam Torrance, Jamie Spence, Mark Rowe, Warren Humphreys, Richard Boxall, just, all great characters, great storytellers. And, we tell war stories all night long. But being with those guys and being involved with the youngsters, I think keeps you young. You go out there and the youngsters go, hello, Grandpa, how are you? And you tell them what to do, and you have a good laugh. And, I've got a good, I think I've got a good connection with the younger players because I still feel like I'm young at heart. When I look in the mirror, it's a lie, but I'm still young at heart.
We'll come back to some of that. Who are the young players that you find a particular affinity with? I'm interested to hear you talk, and intrigued, in fact, to hear you talk about that volatile temper on the golf course, because you're clearly a very gregarious, happy person. Your commentary is the same. You've always got a one-liner and some fantastic jokes, and it's a joy to listen to. That's Jekyll and Hyde, what you're describing. What's going on there? Which is the real Tony Johnstone?
Oh, no, Jekyll and Hyde, he had nothing on me. I've always thought that golf brings out the best and the worst in you. It brought out the best in me in terms of competitive instinct, desire, and determination. But unfortunately, it also brought out the worst side of me. The easily brought to frustration and easily brought to anger, which are not traits of my character that I'm proud of, and I've fought them my whole life. But, being a redhead, I was always a bit feisty, and I just couldn't understand why I couldn't achieve a greater ability to be consistently good. And I never came to terms with that. The great players can put a bad shot behind them. It doesn't faze them at all. I was exactly the opposite. If you saw me on an adjacent fairway, you knew if I'd made birdie or double. You knew when to say hello and when not to. And, it was a failure. It was a failing in my own character. And I did try to beat it. And unfortunately, I just failed miserably.
A nightmare for caddies, you must have been over the years.
No, strangely enough, I think if you asked my caddies, I reckon I'm pretty sure every single caddy that ever caddied for me would say that they enjoyed caddying for me because, some people are crowd blamers, some caddy blamers. It was always my fault. Well, me and my clubs, I did used to go through quite a few shafts as well, but I never blamed the caddy because, I was aware of the fact that my caddy was doing the best he could. His livelihood depended on him giving the best advice he could. And, I was never a caddy blamer. It was, I'd give myself an uppercut or, I'd do all sorts of weird stuff out there. But, I don't think I was a nightmare for the caddy.
Maybe you needed to be more like that, perhaps, Tony. Maybe that was the key. Stop blaming yourself and find others to blame. And in fact, there's a line of thinking in professional golf that says exactly that, isn't it? That you should never blame yourself. Always find some other reason so that it's never your fault.
Yeah, but that just wasn't what was. Yeah, no, it was never me. I couldn't face that. I knew the fault was mine, and I just wasn't enough of a hypocrite to blame. The butterflies fluttering 400 yards away, that put me off, and I was a self-blamer.
Back to television. What do you see when you look at young golfers? Have golfers themselves changed? We know the game's changed. We've talked about that and the way it's played, partly through equipment and money, and for all sorts of reasons, it's evolved into what we see today, which is still a fabulously entertaining product. I think sometimes people think we bang on a lot about the ball and equipment and those things. People think that we have no respect or take no joy out of the modern game. That's not true. The modern players are at least as talented, if perhaps not more, than people in the past. There's no question about that. But it is a different game, and have the golfers who play it changed?
It is a different game.
Have they changed? What do you see?
I think the money's done a lot, has a lot to do with that. There is a heck of a lot of money out there, and it's more of a big business now. I think, again, the managers have ensured that's partly the reason. Everything is structured, your finances, blah, blah, blah. But the equipment's made a big difference, and 100% with you. The young guys out there, the young guns today, the young breed, have got absolutely as much talent as we ever had. There's no reason why they shouldn't. But they're asked less questions because of the equipment. They're not asked to shape the ball as much and hit the delicate shots. And I feel sorry for them because they'll never get to enjoy that side of the game. And, Mike Clayton said last week that the gulf between the best players and the decent players 30 years ago was much bigger because the top players had the ability to do something special with a golf ball. And that gulf has narrowed hugely, with the equipment, the big-headed drivers and the low-spinning balls, blah, blah, blah. But the guys are equally good. But, I'd like to see a softer ball brought back, a ball that spins more, that the guys can't just get up and smash, hit and hope, find a wedge and putt it out. Accuracy should be more important, and distance should be less important. The longer hitters have always had an advantage, and so they should. If you're a long straight hitter like Norman, 100% you get the advantage. But to be long and cockeyed, you should not get rewarded for that. And, nothing will ever change my mind on that. Well,
Norman was long at 280 as an average.
Yes.
Now 280, in fact, I'm not sure that you'd be on the tour at 280. There are five or six.
No, you couldn't survive.
No, there are 5 or 6 women on the LPGA who average 280. So there's something to be said for athleticism, but it's not. It's absurd.
No. Look, Rod. When I was on tour, I carried the ball about 240 to 245 if I crushed one. I ran it up. Norman was at 280 to 285, which was a massive difference, and it wouldn't have been as big a difference if he'd been a chopper and he hit the ball sideways. But he just rifled it down the sprinklers, down the middle at 280, and he was always going in with 3 or 4 clubs less than you. That's hard to beat. But he was given the advantage of being a wonderful striker of the ball. And, yes, absolutely. If you're that good, you should be better than anyone else.
He's pretty decent at the rest of the game, which was the other frightening thing as a competitor, I imagine. He could chip it and putt it and all those other things, as you said before. Let's move away from golf a little bit, Tony. I said 2 things I want to talk to you about. There's actually 3. I can't believe I nearly forgot this. I got wrapped up in the golf conversation. You, of course, have MS, multiple sclerosis.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that and what that journey's like, when you found out what that meant. And I think you're a fabulous success story for a trial drug that worked amazingly well for you.
Yes. Look, everybody at some point has a big health hiccup. And, I'm hoping that was my one. I'm not in a hurry to have another one. But, the short story is I got, 02 and 03. I could barely play. I couldn't finish 18 holes. I was just exhausted. And my coordination would go, my legs would go. I was diagnosed with MS and got onto a drugs trial, a drug called Campath, which has changed its name a few times since then. And, with MS, the best drugs they can offer is that it slows down the progression of the MS by about 30%. This was a brand new idea. They got this drug that had previously been used for for organ transplants to reduce your immune system to stop the organs being rejected. And they thought, well, look, if we give you a massive dose of this, shut down your immune system completely, maybe your immune system will come back without a dodgy memory, which basically MS is. It goes around attacking things in your body, trying to heal stuff where there's nothing wrong. Okay. So it's an overactive immune system. And I had this treatment for 5 days, 2 years in a row, And that was it. No further pills, nothing else. I was told I'd never play golf again. And I managed to get out of the seniors tour and play for another 10 years. My coordination was never the same, and fatigue has always been a big issue. I mean, the guys will tell you, even in the comms box, particularly in hot weather, hot, humid weather has a bad effect. I sit there with a mic and occasionally I hit myself in the forehead when I sort of just start dozing a bit. You just can't help that. And the only cure is to have a 10-minute kip. But I was so lucky. I was given a lease on life. The national average in the UK from onset of MS to wheelchair is 15 years. It's now 16 years since I had my second treatment, and I can, I could still play the game if I really wanted to. I can do everything I want, and I can enjoy life. So yeah, I had a wonderful break, and unfortunately it took 17 years to get that passed. Through all the red tapes, there were a lot of people that didn't have it, and you've got to have it in the early years of MS for it really to be efficacious. So a lot of people missed out on that. I was just lucky. I got the 120th spot on a trial of 120 people, and I've always said that was the best cut I ever made.
The cut on the number and went on to win.
Yeah. No, I'll be eternally grateful for that. I mean, it really did give me, who knows? I've had another 16 years of normal life and more to come, hopefully.
And is that cured, Tony? Are you now MS free? Is that what that means?
They will never say MS free. They'll say in remission, because they can't say free, because if you get another attack, people start pointing fingers. But yeah, other than a much lowered energy level and struggling with extreme heat and humidity, other than that, I have no symptoms. So in my mind, I don't think about it day to day. I don't think, I'm an MS sufferer. I just think of myself as a really lazy bastard who likes to lie on the couch a lot.
If you can get a spot, you'd have to remove your wife first, which would mean I'm doing the Velcro. What did that do for perspective when that happened? Because that happened later in life, as you said, for your career, which is, I imagine, interesting as well. But
it happened just before I went on the seniors tour, and Mark James, a really good friend of mine, and always he was seriously misunderstood. Mark James, primarily because of his walk. He just looked like a miserable sod walking around the golf course.
And only a true friend would say that.
One of the best. He's got one of the best senses of humor in the world. Great guy, genuine guy, warm guy, and he got diagnosed sort of prior to that, my MS treatment, with he had a tumor in his stomach that they discovered just about the size of a rugby ball. It was huge. And yeah, absolutely. And they found this, and he did all the chemo and he got cured. And I used to phone Jesse fairly regularly, and I said to him, once he started playing again, I said, Jesse, has this changed your perspective on life and golf in particular? He said, absolutely not. He said, theoretically it should, but he said, as soon as I play badly, I want to hang myself. And I was the same. I went out and I thought, I'm going to have this different perspective on life. I'm going to be calmer. I'm going to be, I'm going to be more mature. All that rubbish. And I wasn't. I still acted like an insane child out there. It's just the competitive instinct. You want to perform the best you can. It's just how
fantastic. It is. Poor old Mark James. He might be at the other end of the worst luck story in history. Was it 2 years ago at the old course? He hit a bird with his tee shot and deflected out of bounds. It's just staggering that it could happen. I mean, and we laugh because it happened to somebody else, but there's nothing funny about that if you're Mark James. I think he was contending at the time, if I'm not mistaken. The senior open it was.
And his reaction, anybody else, you'd get a sort of, his shoulders dropped. He's one of my good friends, but man, I just about whacked myself laughing when I saw that. It was the funniest thing.
Indeed. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Tony, was bird watching. You're an avid bird and wildlife watcher.
Yeah.
In fact, I discovered when I went to do my idea of research is to put your name in Google and see what comes up. And I came up with a TV series called Bushwhacking or Bush Hacking.
Yeah, Bush
What's
hacking.
that about?
Yeah, no.
And what's the interest in wildlife?
So much
Where'd that
fun
come
doing
from?
that. Interesting wildlife is, I was always interested in wildlife. I was always interested in shooting, actually, to begin with. In our part of the world, everyone had an air rifle at 10 or 11. And I love the precision of shooting, which is probably what drove me mad with golf, because I could never approach anything like that. But we lived out of town, and across the road there was a big area of bush. And, prior to really getting into golf, I used to go out there at 10, 11 years of age with my air rifle and my pellets, my bottle of water and a sandwich, and I felt like the great explorer. And I was out there and, I would pay attention. I was intrigued by the flowers and the birds and, everything that was out there. The only thing I didn't really want to see was snakes, because our parents stressed, that they weren't a good idea to cross. And that instilled the interest in me. And I always had a great interest. Our parents used to take us to game reserves to watch animals. And I got into bird watching late in life. My great friend Colin Little, who I stay with in South Africa when I'm always down there, when we moved to Europe in '93, he said, why don't you come and stay with us? And he's never managed to get rid of me. I still stay with him. But his grandfather had got him interested in bird watching when he was about 4. We were on holiday together in, I think, 2000. And we were sitting around the pool, and there was a little bird whistling in the bushes next to the pool. I said, okay, smart ass, I know you're good with your birding. What kind of bird is that? And he immediately reeled off the name. I said, well, that's impressive. I said, how many birds are there in South Africa? He said, well, about 960 species. I said, and you can tell me that call. So, yeah. I said, well, where is it? I can't see it. He said, no, you're looking too high. And I can't remember what the bird was. He said, that bird you'll find down in the lower strata of the bushes, and he'll be sitting very still. So stop. And I thought, man, this is interesting. I talked birding with him thereafter and got absolutely thoroughly involved with birding. I love it. It's intriguing. And the good thing about it was, if you go to a game reserve, everybody wants to see the big five and the animals. But when you've seen those, you've seen them, and you might not see that much in the day. But when you're in the Bundu, there are always birds. There's always bird calls and different birds and different colors and things happening. And yeah, I fell in love with it. And the bird hacking. If people haven't seen it, there's a website, birdhacking.com. One of the girls that produces out in South Africa said to me the one December, "You like the Bundu?" I said, "I do." She said, "I've got an idea." And she came to me on the SA tour in the January, a month later, and she said, "I've got this idea. We're going to go into the Kruger Park with a ranger and a cameraman, and we're going to talk about animals in the Kruger Park." And I said, "Are you completely bonkers?" I said, "There's lions, there's elephants, and you can't walk in the Kruger Park. It's forbidden." She said, "Don't worry, I've got this covered." So she came back to me a week later and said, "I've got permission." I said, "Permission for what?" "Now, we're going to get an armed ranger, cameraman, sound guy, producer, and you. We're going to walk in the Kruger Park and talk about animals." Geez, this is going to be interesting. And off we went and did it. And she did a wonderful job. Ilana Gordon, her name is, nicknamed Flash. I'll give her a punt because she's an absolute gem. I love her to pieces. And there we went. I did all the research and I did the scripting. And then we would go into the park and, we'd drive around and try and find stuff. Then we would walk around and look for stuff. And sometimes we would just find something and I just have to use my knowledge off the top of my head and just do an episode. And we ended up doing 3 series of bush hacking. I think it's about 39 or 40 episodes in all. And people haven't seen it, especially now we've got time to kill. Go and watch it because it's an awful lot of fun.
Fantastic. A little bit like Ian Baker Finch, I've seen this about him as well. He's having a whole second career in television, which is not easy to learn. People dedicate their entire lives to getting into and being good at television the same way they do with golf. What you've just described there is absolutely proper television. Do you consider yourself now a broadcaster or a golfer?
When I fill in immigration forms, I still put pro golfer. And Karen, my wife, looks at me. She says, "You're not a pro golfer. You don't play anymore." Shut up.
I'm just having a,
of course, I've
always
been a pro golfer. Right. Don't be daft, woman. Yeah, I'm just having a break, man. But you know what? I consider myself a golf commentator. But having worked with top broadcasters, guys like Doogie Donnelly, Dom Holier, David Livingston for Sky, Ewan Murray, there's a huge difference between professional broadcasters who can do lead commentary. That is a gift that I don't think I'll ever possess. You've got to be so quick on your feet and have such a good memory, which I don't have. So I see myself as a golf commentator. I talk about the shots. I've been there, I've done that, and I love it. And what a wonderful thing. There are not many people in life that can say they've had 2 jobs and absolutely loved both of them. I mean, I've been blessed. I really have been blessed, right?
A bit like golf, we, the viewing public, don't appreciate how good broadcasters are, do we? Most people, if you stuck a camera in their face for all the criticism they make of everybody, would immediately be unable to walk. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. They become so self-conscious, let alone talk off the top of their head, as you say. They make it look easy, which is why they're the pros, aren't they? It's much harder than they make it look.
Yeah, well, the European tour productions have this thing where they bring guys in to do half an hour's commentary with us during the European tournaments, and it's a wonderful thing. You put the headphones on them, and you've got the producer's voice, and you've got the you've got the counts going in the background, and their eyes open up, and they go, "Who are all these people talking in my ears?" There's a lot going on, isn't there? Look, we can turn that down for you, absolutely, and I think they all leave there with a different perspective of what commentary is, and you'll do 4.5 or 5 hours of commentary, and people will pick out one cock-up that you've made along the line, And I've always said to people, it's way more tiring, and it takes a lot more concentration to do 5 hours of commentary than it does to play a tournament round. Because a tournament round, you hit a shot, you relax for 5 minutes. But in there, you're in front of the screen, you're in front of the monitor, you've got these voices in your ear, you've got to be watching the leaderboards, the laptop, the shots on TV. And, the first time I did it, I thought, my God, I don't know if I can do this. And I don't think everybody can. Some guys just never learn to cope with all of that. But, primarily, you've got to be a professional bull duster. And now they pay me for doing it. What a wonderful thing to do.
If you'd found this all those years ago instead of golf, who knows where you might have gone in the world and developed into.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful to be involved.
Who are the best in the business?
I'm just sad that,
who do you look up to in golf and golf commentary? Who do you hear on TV and go, oh, people won't appreciate it, but boy, he's good. Or she's good. There's a lot of great women commentators too.
Peter Ellis was the doyen.
You're way out on a limb there, Tony. Be careful out there. Be careful out there on that limb, Peter Ellis.
No, he was just a joy.
Well, naturally gifted.
Henry Longmist was just before my time. But Peter Ellis is a wordsmith, and he just makes people feel so involved, which is something I've always wanted to do. I've tried to give a player's perspective, but I want the viewer at home to feel like they're sitting in the comms box with us, just having a beer and just talking a load of rubbish. But Peter Ellis had a gift that is rarely seen. And I got a phone call from him about 3 months ago, out the blue. And I haven't seen Peter for a while. And he phoned me up. He said, I've got his number on the phone, but I haven't used it for years. Peter Ellis. I thought, oh, my God, it's his wife phoning to tell me that Peter's passed away or something. And Peter just phoned to say hello and to tell me that he really enjoyed my commentary. And I cannot tell you how much that meant to me to have Peter Ellis. It's like Sevi saying, you have a wonderful short game. But he phoned to say that he enjoyed my commentary. He loved listening to me and, just keep doing what I'm doing. Man, I walked out of there like cock of the hoop. I went straight through to the lounge. I said, guess who phoned me to tell me I'm doing all right? And it just meant so much. But he's a one-off. But we have got some fabulous professional broadcasters out there. And, if broadcasting was as easy as people think, everybody would be doing it. It's, we all make cock-ups. I make cock-ups. Sure I do. But, don't try and skirt around it. Just admit you made a cock-up and get on with it. Everyone makes mistakes.
The criticism, of course, for the trolling public is always that the commentators are far too nice about the players, that nobody calls them on it when they choke. Johnny Miller was great because he'd just call it as he saw it. Are they being fair? What's your responsibility as the professional commentating on what the professional is doing? What's your responsibility to the viewer and to the player in terms of a player hits and it generally comes around when players hit a bad shot, obviously.
Yeah, I think my responsibility as a co-commentator, a colour commentator, is to tell the truth. If a guy chunks a chip, I'm not going to say, oh, that was a bad lie. I'm going to say, oh, that was absolutely horrendous, because I put myself in that position, and I know if I was standing there, I would say that was absolutely horrendous, but probably not quite as nicely, and I probably would have got fined for what I'd said. But, I think the majority of players realize that you're not trying to be harsh. You're trying to call it as it is, because when they hit a great shot, I will say it's a stunning shot. My goal has always been to say it as it is. And if I see a player afterwards, I'll say, look, I'm sorry, I called that shot as horrendous. And 99% of the times they'll say, I don't think you were hard enough. It was an absolute shambles. And I think you get an understanding with the players. You get a connection with him, and they'll trust you. I go out on Tuesday and Wednesday and talk to players and get all sorts of stories about private life or, what's going on in their lives. And, I always say to them, look, what parts of that can I use? If you lose that trust, you're done. You might as well go and get something else. So I will never, ever say anything over there that's being told to me in confidence, obviously. They have to trust you. And I think the guys generally would respect me for the fact that I am calling it as it is. And, the odd guy that doesn't like it, well, tough titty. Off you go. If you can't take a bit of criticism, find somebody else to talk to.
You're doing something public for a living. The public get to have a say about what it is that you're doing. That's the deal you make when you get into professional golf.
Yes.
What did you make of the Azinger blow-up recently about that European tour? Did you involve yourself in that at all?
No, I didn't. You know what? Again, I played with Zinger a couple of times and really, really enjoyed playing with him. I found him good company. And if you take the word "that" out of it, it's a bit like doing commentary. You can make a mistake somewhere along the line, put in the odd word here or there and get shot down in flames. People have always marveled that I haven't sworn on air yet. I marvel that I've never sworn on air yet. But I think in the context of that statement, if you'd taken the word "that" out of it, he's put one word in there and he's got absolutely slaughtered for it. I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt because I don't think he would have meant that about the European Tour. I really don't. And what he said about the PGA Tour being players' goals.
True.
Well, he wasn't lying.
100% true.
I'm not trying to downgrade the European Tour, but all our top players go to America. There's a heap more money over there. Generally speaking, more world rankings, so it's better for your career. Look, everybody loves the European Tour. Guys like Brooks Koepka comes back here because he loves it. But he wasn't telling lies. He wasn't telling lies. So I just kept out of it. I kept my nose clean. I love the European Tour. I don't want to cause waves. But for me, I thought if I take that one word out, he hasn't really said anything that wrong. It's quite easy to get taken out of context. And he never really put up a defense. No. And I think, just let it go. Let it go. Because I always found him...
And everyone says the same thing about him. His politics, I think, are questionable. Yeah. To me, I don't agree with a lot of his political stuff that he talks about, sort of used to on social media and whatnot, but that's got nothing to do with anything. He's been a terrific player over time and certainly knows his stuff. It felt to me like the sort of comment, had he made it in a bar in a conversation with yourself and two or three others, you might have put him and go, whoa, easy there. And he would go, no, I didn't mean it that way. That's how it felt to me. But you don't get that chance on television. To immediately sort of repair
100%.
Repair what had happened. What is your take on what's going to happen with golf, Tony? Internationally, we're at an interesting time, and this coronavirus is going to bring on. Well, it's making life very interesting. The PGA Tour, the European Tour, that Premier Golf League, all of that was bubbling away when golf just suddenly stopped. What do you think the future is? Suddenly
just off a cliff edge, aren't we, at the moment? I think the future is good. Golf's been around for an awful long time. A lot of people love the game. They love the challenge of the game. I think the game is in good hands. The RNA now are a different body of men to what they were in the early 80s. I mean, I used to have fights every single Open Championship I played in the 80s and early 90s. I would get into a row with somebody and end up getting put off at 4:30 the following year. I mean, year after year, I went off at 4:20 or 4:30 because I'd upset somebody. There were a lot of guys out there with their rosettes on and the soup-stained tie, and it's not like that anymore. We've got a vibrant young bunch of people. Their intentions for the game are very good, and I think they want to move the game forward. I think they've proved that. They're approaching the equipment issue, etc., and they do a wonderful amount for the game. I'll tell you very quickly, Rod, my eye-opener. My in-laws lived up in the Eastern Highlands in Zimbabwe. My mother-in-law ran a little golf club called Claremont Golf, membership of about, it was out in the six. And one day I arrived there because we were on our usual Christmas break out there, and here was a nice newish mower, almost a brand new mower we got wheeled out. I said, where'd you get that from? And my mother-in-law said, the RAF sent it to us. I said, what? The RNA. So I actually phoned the RNA when I got home and said, listen, guys, can I just get filled in with, how this all works? And the amount of work they do to keep golf alive and above water in distant parts of the world, and the money they spend on keeping interest going in the game was astonishing. And from that moment on, I had a different perspective of what the RNA do. And I think it's in good hands. I think the USGA are catching up. Sometimes I don't think they're quite as ahead of the game as the RNA.
It's a different game in America.
We still
argue. Everything about golf is different.
Yeah,
in America,
it is
to me.
It is. It's different. But I think all in all, golf's not going to die. It's going to keep going. Maybe we can find ways to make it more interesting. Maybe, I don't know how we make it cheaper. That's a big thing because there's no doubt it's seriously expensive now. It is an expensive game. When I played in Bulawayo and Rhodesia all those years ago, we used to get given 10 cents. And out of that, we went to play golf. We had a caddy. We practiced all day. We had a little bet for a pie and Coke, during one of the rounds. And when we got home, our parents said, where's the change? I mean, it was unbelievable. It was, we just played golf all day on 10 cents and had a little gamble along the way. And it was amazing. But you can't do that now. You want to go and have a game somewhere. It's costing you hundreds of pounds or dollars or whatever. And it's a bit daunting, especially with the financial climate, after the crash in 07, 08, things are worse now. Somehow we've got to just make it, we just got to get more people in. How? I don't know. But
it feels much of
that's
that
the goal.
Expense is about expectation. It's that Augustus syndrome, don't you feel, that people have an expectation of paying a certain amount of money and being dished up a certain set of conditions which are judged to be better than others. It is the obsession with the game amongst golfers which might ultimately kill the goose that laid the golden egg in many ways. This desire for perfect grass conditions, both in terms of playability and aesthetically, which is extraordinarily expensive and, frankly, completely overrated and does nothing for the game. I think, as Mike Clayton has said more than once, he's been a member at Metro for 40 years. He's yet to have a bad lie, and that's not a good thing for golf.
No, I agree. It's just the expense, the cost of it, as you said, Rod, is just phenomenal.
Could professional golf do the whole game a favour by just occasionally going to a golf course that wasn't perfect? We see relentless pictures week in and week out from tours around the world, men's tours and women's tours, of golf courses in absolutely perfect condition. It's normally one of the talking points. You'll hear at some point a player during the week say, the greens are perfect, the conditions are perfect, unless there's been some form of weather event. And they'll say in that case the grounds crew have done an amazing job to get the course as playable as it is. But there's something in that, isn't there, that if we keep dishing up on television this bright green golf with these perfectly manicured edges, that's what people expect to find when they go to the local golf course.
Yes, it is. And, you say, could the pros play in a different golf course? Probably not, because they get served up perfect courses every week. It made all of us fairly precious. If you arrived at a course and it was in sort of fairly shoddy condition without any sensible reason like a drought or floods, you would play it. Some guys would pack their clubs and go home. You would play it, but you'd have to think twice about going back the following year because, there's so much golf now that you can pick and choose the courses that are going to be in great condition. So I think that's a non-starter. But if we could get amateurs to understand that courses don't have to be perfect to have a great time out there. The fun for amateur golf is being out there with your buddies and having a laugh and being outdoors and, just enjoying nature. Let's instill more of that into golf.
For recreational golf, it's never about the golf, Tony. If it was about the golf, we would have all given up years ago. As you rightly pointed out yourself, the level of playing ability is not what brings you back. You get one around generally. That's how it works. You hit that one shot that ensures that you'll be back next week. I'd love to chat to you for even longer, but I've taken a lot of your precious time. I know there's not a whole lot in the diary, but that doesn't mean that time's not ticking and you've got other things to do. So been great to catch up, my friend. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks a lot, Rob.
That's it for episode 18. I hope you enjoyed it even half as much as I did. What a fabulous attitude Tony brings to the game. And while it was remiss of me not to mention it during the interview there, 25 professional wins on his resume. He has some golf cred too. On our next episode, we jump from the glory days of the 80s and 90s to the modern reality that is professional golf and trying to make it in a world where just earning a tour card can feel like winning a major. Our guest is former British amateur champion and standout former college player, Bryden McPherson. That's next time on The Thing About Golf.